I never thought I'd be a man who kneels. I don't mean for a proposal. Down on one knee with a ring in a velvet box. I'd done that before. In another life. It felt like. And I don't mean kneeling to apologize, groveling after some stupid mistake. I'd done that too, more times than I like to admit. My pride tasting like ash in my mouth. No, this was different. I was kneeling on the cold, polished hardwood of a bedroom floor that no longer felt like mine, while Vivian stood over me, in her hands. She held a dress. It was a classic French maid's uniform, a confection of crisp black fabric and starched white lace. The sight of it was so alien, so out of place in the context of my life, that my brain struggled to process it. It was like seeing a fish trying to climb a tree. Vivian's face was calm, her expression as serene as if she were holding a new sweater she'd bought for me, but her eyes, those sharp, intelligent eyes that had always seemed to see right through my carefully constructed walls, were gleaming with an intensity that terrified me. "I don't want you to play the role of my man anymore, Ethan," she said, her voice a soft melody that was completely at odds with the seismic shock of her words. "I want you to be my servant." In that single, crystalline moment, the world I had built for myself, the entire edifice of my identity, didn't just crack, it atomized. A wave of nausea, hot and acidic, rolled through my stomach. It was a physical reaction to a psychological blow. Disgust. Humiliation. It felt like being stripped naked in a crowded room, like being dethroned from the very seat of my manhood. Everything I had ever defined myself by strength. Control, decisiveness was being systematically dismantled by the woman I loved, with a simple piece of clothing as her weapon. I wanted to laugh in her face, to tell her she was insane. I wanted to stand up, grab the ridiculous costume from her hands, and throw it out the window. I wanted to roar, to reassert the dominance that was supposed to be my birthright as a man. I opened my mouth to do just that, to unleash a torrent of angry, wounded pride. But then, she tilted her head. A small, almost imperceptible gesture, and a faint smile touched her lips. "You've been such a good boy, Ethan, always trying so hard." And that's when the real panic set in. Because beneath the tidal wave of shame and outrage, a traitorous pulse beat in my veins. A hot, confusing thrum of something else. Excitement. My heart hammered against my ribs. A frantic, desperate rhythm that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with the way she said "good boy." It was the most terrifying thing I had ever felt. To understand how I ended up on that floor, you have to understand the man I was before. My name is Ethan Walker, and for 29 years, my entire life was a monument to control. I wasn't just a participant in life. I was a driver, a director, a decider. In high school, I was the quarterback, the guy who called the plays, the one everyone looked to when the clock was running down. My voice was the one that cut through the chaos in the huddle, promising a path to victory. That's what being a man was about, seeing the path and forcing everyone else onto it. In college, I translated that onto the rugby pitch. It was a more brutal game, a more honest expression of force and will. I loved the feeling of impact, the grimy, sweat-soaked struggle for every inch of ground. I was the captain. Of course, I led with a kind of joyful tyranny, pushing my teammates past their limits, demanding perfection because I demanded it of myself. Weakness, in my mind, was a moral failing. Hesitation was the enemy. I didn't just dislike dependence. I was allergic to it. I couldn't stand seeing it in others, and the very idea of it in myself was unthinkable. My professional life was no different. I worked in logistics, a field that's all about control. I managed supply chains, orchestrated the movement of goods across continents, and solved complex problems with cold, hard data. My world was one of spreadsheets, deadlines, and direct orders. I was good at it because it mirrored the way my brain worked, A to B to C, no room for emotional detours. I took pride in my ability to remain detached, to make the tough calls without flinching. I was the guy you called when things were falling apart. because I was the one who could wrestle chaos into submission. When I met Vivienne, I thought she was drawn to that strength. She was different from the women I'd dated before. There was a stillness about her, an elegant composure that was a stark contrast to my own restless energy. She was a curator at a small prestigious art gallery. Her world was one of aesthetics, nuance, and quiet contemplation. I saw her as a beautiful, tranquil harbor where I, the conquering ship, could rest. She seemed to love my decisiveness. I chose the restaurants. I planned the trips. I initiated everything. I saw our relationship in the same terms. I saw everything else. I was the leader, the protector, the one in charge. And for a while, it worked. She would listen to my stories from work, her chin resting on her hand. With that same serene smile, she seemed to appreciate the way I carved a path through the world. But I was a fool. I saw what I wanted to see. I didn't realize that while I was busy controlling our world. She was studying me. She wasn't just observing my strength. She was analyzing the effort it took to maintain it. She saw the tension in my shoulders that never quite went away, the way I clenched my jaw when I was stressed, the exhaustion behind my eyes after a long day of forcing my will upon the world. She saw that my iron will was really a suit of armor, and it was heavy. Vivienne didn't fall in love with the armor. She fell in love with the man she suspected was suffocating inside it. Her fantasy wasn't born from a crude desire to dominate me in a physical sense. It was something far more subtle, and in its own way, far more profound. She craved the chance to see me, just once, lay the armor down. She wanted to see me surrender, not to her, but to the exhaustion of my own performance. She wanted to unburden me. Of course, when she first presented it, I didn't see it that way. I saw it as a direct assault on my identity. After that first, shocking night, I stormed out of the apartment. I remember the sound of my own voice, raw and shaking with a fury I hadn't felt in years. "What the hell is wrong with you, Viv?" "A servant. A maid, is that what you think of me, that I'm some kind of joke?" "No, Ethan," she had replied, her voice still infuriatingly calm. "I think you're the strongest man I've ever met. And I think you're tired of having to prove it every single second of every day, Ian." Her words were meant to be insightful, but they felt like a slap in the face. I left. I drove to my own small apartment across town, the one I'd kept just in case, and slammed the door. The sound echoing in the empty rooms. I expected to feel relief, the freedom of escaping a madhouse. Instead, I felt nothing, just a hollow, ringing silence. The first night, I drank half a bottle of whiskey, hoping to burn the image of that stupid dress out of my mind. It didn't work. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, and all I could see was the crisp white lace of the apron. All I could hear was her voice saying, "Good boy." Sleep wouldn't come, or when it did, it was shallow and filled with unsettling dreams. I'd go to work and find myself staring blankly at a spreadsheet, my mind replaying the scene over and over. I tried to focus on the anger, to hold on to the righteous indignation. It was the only thing that felt familiar, the only thing that felt like me. But beneath the anger, something else was stirring. It was her analysis of me. "You're tired of having to prove it." Was I? I thought about the constant pressure, the self-imposed demand to always be in control, to always have the answer, to never show a moment of weakness. It was a 24-hour-a-day job, and I had never once considered that I could just quit. The idea was as foreign as the maid's dress itself. The image of the dress began to change in my mind. It was no longer just an object of humiliation. It became a symbol of an alternative. A door to a room I never knew existed. What would it feel like to walk through it? What would it feel like to stop fighting, to stop controlling, to simply obey? The thought was repulsive, and it was intoxicating. For a week, I was a ghost haunting my own life. I was disconnected, agitated, lost. The world I had controlled so perfectly now felt like a cage. Finally, after 7 sleepless nights, I couldn't take it anymore. I drove back to her apartment, my heart pounding a nervous rhythm against my ribs. I stood outside her door for a full 10 minutes before I could bring myself to knock. When she opened it, she didn't look surprised. She just looked at me with those knowing eyes. I swallowed my pride. It was the bitterest pill I'd ever taken. "Okay," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Okay. We can try this. Your way." I had to claw back some semblance of control, even if it was an illusion. But there are rules. This is a game. Just once. To see what it's about. One time. And that's it. No more. Vivienne didn't argue. She didn't gloat. She just smiled. A genuine, radiant smile that reached her eyes. "Of course, Ethan," she said, stepping aside to let me in. "It's just a game." But as I walked past her, I knew, with a sinking and strangely thrilling certainty, that I had already lost. The first step felt less like a game and more like a systematic dismantling of my identity. It began in the bathroom, a place that had always been a bastion of my masculinity. The shaving cream, the aftershave, the solid heavy razor I used on my face every morning. Now, Vivienne handed me a different kind of razor, lighter, more curved, and a bottle of scented shaving gel. "Your legs," she said, her voice matter of fact. "A maid must have smooth legs. It's part of the uniform." I stood there, staring at my own legs, at the dark hair that covered my calves and thighs. It was just hair. It was a part of me, a signifier of my manhood that I'd never even thought to question. To remove it felt like a violation, a bizarre and intimate form of surrender. "Viv, this is crazy," I stammered, looking for an out. "It's part of the game. Ethan, you agreed. Just once." She left me alone in the bathroom, closing the door softly behind her. I sat on the edge of the tub, the razor feeling alien in my hand. For a long time, I just sat there. Then, with a deep breath, I lathered the gel onto my left calf. The scent was floral, something like lavender. It was her scent. The sensation was cool and slick. I pressed the razor against my skin, just above the ankle, and pulled it upwards. It glided smoothly, leaving a pale, naked path in its wake. The dark hair, my hair, collected in the blades, suspended in the pink foam. I stared at it, mesmerized and horrified. I did the other leg. Then my thighs. The process was slow, methodical, with each stroke of the razor. I felt like I was scraping away a layer of myself. It was a strange, disembodying sensation. When I was done, I rinsed my legs under the shower. The water felt different on the bare skin. I stepped out and towel dried, my hands hesitating as they moved over the unfamiliar smoothness. I touched my calf. It was slick, soft, completely foreign. I felt a shudder run through me, a primal revulsion mixed with a terrifying flicker of curiosity. I couldn't bring myself to look in the full-length mirror. I wasn't ready to see the man with the legs of a woman. When I came out of the bathroom, Vivienne was waiting in the bedroom. The maid's dress was laid out neatly on the bed. She didn't say anything, just gestured towards it. My heart was pounding. This was the moment of truth. I took off my clothes, my movements stiff and awkward. Standing there naked felt less vulnerable than what I was about to do. I picked up the dress. The black fabric was heavier than I expected, the white parts starchy and stiff. It was a real uniform, not some flimsy costume. I slipped it over my head. It was a struggle to get my arms through the puffy sleeves. The fabric was tight across my shoulders and chest. It wasn't designed for a man's frame. The waist was cinched tight, forcing me to hold my stomach in. The skirt fell to just above my knees, and the material rustled as I moved, a sound I had never made before. The feeling was indescribable. It was a combination of being completely exposed and strangely encased. The heavy fabric was a constricting shell. Yet the bareness of my legs from the knee down felt shockingly obscene. The rough texture of the dress's inner seams chafed against my skin, a constant reminder of what I was wearing. Then came the white apron. Vivian picked it up. "Turn around," she said softly. I obeyed. My back to her. I felt her drape the apron around my waist. Her fingers were cool and delicate as she pulled the ties snug, knotting them firmly in the small of my back. As she did, her fingertips brushed against the nape of my neck. A jolt, electric and sharp, shot down my spine. It wasn't fear. It was something else. Something I couldn't name. I trembled, an involuntary spasm that shook my whole body. She stepped back. The room was silent except for the frantic beating of my own heart. I stood there, frozen, staring at the wall, feeling the constricting dress, the tight apron, the cold air on my newly shaven legs. I felt like a stranger in my own body. "Now," Vivian said, her voice cutting through the haze in my mind. "Kneel." The command was simple, 2 words, but it was a declaration of war on everything I had ever been. My mind screamed in protest. "No. Stand up. Walk out. Be a man." My body, however, was a traitor. My legs, those strange, smooth alien legs, felt weak. My knees unlocked. Slowly, clumsily, with the gracelessness of a collapsing puppet. I lowered myself to the floor. My knees hit the hardwood with a dull thud. I was kneeling before her, dressed in a maid's uniform. The humiliation was so profound, it was almost a physical weight, pressing me down. I should have stood up immediately. I should have ripped the dress off and run. But I didn't. I stayed there, on my knees. The unfamiliar weight of the skirt pulled around me, my head bowed. And in the crushing silence, I waited for what would come next. The training began not with actions, but with words. Language, Vivian explained, was the foundation of a new mindset. My old way of speaking direct, assertive, often demanding, had to be unlearned. It was the verbal equivalent of the muscular tension I always carried in my shoulders. "From now on, when you are in uniform, you will not speak unless spoken to," she instructed. She was sitting in an armchair, looking down at me as I knelt on a small rug she had placed in the center of the living room. "When you refer to yourself, you will not use I or me. You will say this maid. For example, this maid understands, or this maid requires clarification." I felt a surge of defiant anger. It was one thing to wear the ridiculous outfit as part of a game, but this was different. This was reprogramming. "Vivian, this is absurd," I said, my voice tight. Her expression didn't change. There was no anger, only a patient correction. "You will address me as mistress," she said calmly. "Try again." The word mistress felt like poison on my tongue. It was a word from a world I didn't belong to, a word that codified a power dynamic I was on the wrong side of. I clenched my jaw, the muscle there twitching. Every instinct screamed at me to refuse, to get up and end this charade. But I had agreed. And some deeper, more frightening part of me was curious to see how far this went. I took a breath, the cinched waist of the dress making it feel shallow. This maid understands. Mistress. The words came out choked, tasting of self-loathing. Each syllable was a betrayal of the man I was supposed to be. I hated myself for saying it. I hated her for making me say it. A small smile touched her lips. "Very good. That's a good start." The next few hours were a grueling exercise in humility. She had me practice. She would ask simple questions, and I would have to answer using the proper protocols. "What is your purpose here?" "This maid's purpose is to serve the mistress." "What do you think of your uniform?" "This maid finds the uniform appropriate for her duties." Each answer was a small death. The Ethan I knew, the confident, commanding quarterback and logistician, was being buried under a mountain of meek, subservient phrases. Then came the physical tasks. She didn't ask for anything overtly strenuous, it was all about the posture of servitude. She had me polish the silver. I had to do it kneeling on the floor, my head bowed, my focus entirely on the task. She instructed me on how to present a tray, how to pour tea, a ritual of specific, graceful movements designed to be unobtrusive and pleasing to the observer. It was during this simple act of cleaning the hardwood floors that something shifted. She gave me a soft cloth and a bottle of wood polish. I was on my hands and knees. The skirt of the uniform spread out behind me, working my way across the living room floor. At first, my mind was a raging storm of resentment. This is degrading. I'm a successful man, on my hands and knees like a dog. But as I worked, the repetitive motion of polishing, swirl, wipe, move, began to have a hypnotic effect. The scent of lemon oil filled the air. The only sounds were the soft whisk of the cloth on the wood and Vivian's quiet breathing from the armchair where she sat, reading a book. My thoughts, which were usually a chaotic battlefield of work problems, future plans, and a constant, low-level anxiety, began to quiet down. I wasn't Ethan Walker, logistics manager, worrying about a delayed shipment from Singapore. I wasn't the team captain, strategizing the next play. I was just a maid, polishing a floor. My world shrank to the small patch of wood in front of me. My purpose was simple and clear: make it shine. For the first time in as long as I could remember, the tension in my shoulders began to ease. The constant need to be in control, to anticipate, to direct, was lifted. I wasn't in charge of anything. I was simply following an order. The responsibility wasn't mine. And the feeling, it wasn't humiliation anymore. It was relief. It was a profound, bone-deep sense of peace. I finished the floor and stayed there, on my hands and knees, looking at the gleaming surface. It was perfect. I had done it well. "You've done a very good job." Vivian's voice came from above me. I looked up. She was standing over me, her book set aside. She looked down at me, and her eyes held an expression of genuine approval. "Good maid," she said softly. The words, which should have been the ultimate insult, landed differently this time. They didn't feel like a mockery. They felt like a reward, a simple, honest validation of a task well done. A strange warmth spread through my chest. My body, that traitorous vessel, relaxed completely. My shoulders, which had been hunched in resistance, finally dropped. My thoughts, which had been fighting a war, fell silent. And in that moment, I realized something terrifying and liberating all at once. Submission wasn't about losing myself. It was about taking a vacation from myself. It was a release from the crushing, relentless burden of being Ethan Walker. And God help me, it felt good. The mental shift was one thing, the physical transformation was another. It was a slow, deliberate process, like a sculptor carefully chipping away at a block of marble to reveal a new form. Vivian became my tutor in a new kind of physicality, one that was completely alien to my athletic, aggressive way of moving through the world. It started with my walk. "A maid does not stomp around like a brute," she said one afternoon, her tone light but firm. "She glides. She is present but not intrusive." My walk was a product of years on the football field and rugby pitch, a grounded, wide-stanced gait that was all about stability and power. To change it felt like learning to use my legs all over again. Vivian's method was classic and, I had to admit, effective. She placed a heavy book on top of my head. "Walk from one end of the room to the other," she instructed, without letting it fall. The first few attempts were a disaster. I took 2 steps, and the book, a thick art history tome, slid off and thudded to the floor. I was trying to walk like myself, just more carefully. "No," she corrected. "You're fighting it. Your shoulders are tense. Your hips are locked. You walk from your legs. A maid walks from her core. Engage your stomach. Keep your back straight. your shoulders back and down. Think of a string pulling you up from the crown of your head. It was infuriating. I, who could run through 3 opposing linemen, couldn't walk across a living room, but I kept trying. I focused on her words, on the feeling of my own body. I had to shorten my stride, to place my feet more deliberately, to keep the book balanced. I had to move my hips in a way that felt fluid, feminine. Then, she introduced the heels. They were not stilettos, just a simple pair of black pumps with a modest 2-inch heel, but they might as well have been stilts. The moment I put them on, my entire body was thrown off balance. My weight was pitched forward onto the balls of my feet, my calves immediately tightened, and my posture was forced into an unnatural arch. "Now, walk with the book," she said, a hint of amusement in her voice. Each step was a terrifying combination of intense concentration and deep-seated embarrassment. The click-clack of the heels on the hardwood floor was a constant, audible reminder of my humiliation. My ankles wobbled, I stumbled, but Vivian was patient. She showed me how to place my foot heel, then toe, and how to let the slight sway of my hips absorb the motion. Over days, then weeks, the walk became less of a clumsy stagger and more of a controlled glide. I learned to trust the shoes, to find my balance. The shame started to fade, replaced by a quiet pride in mastering a difficult new skill. Next was my voice. My natural speaking voice was a baritone. Accustomed to cutting through the noise of a huddle or a busy office, it was a tool of command. "A maid's voice should be gentle," Vivian explained. "It's not about pitch. You don't need to sound like a woman. You need to sound soft, reassuring. You must lose the edge of authority." This was, in many ways, harder than walking in heels. We practiced for hours. I would read passages from books, and she would stop me every time a word came out too harsh, too clipped, too loud. "Softer. Ethan. From your diaphragm. Not your chest. Let the words flow. Don't punch them out." I began to listen to my own voice in a way I never had before. I noticed the hard consonants, the abrupt endings of my sentences. I practiced speaking in a lower volume, rounding out the edges of my words, letting my tone become more melodic. It felt unnatural at first, like I was putting on a fake persona. But one evening, while I was serving her dinner, a task that had become part of our routine, I asked, "Will there be anything else?" Mistress, and the voice that came out was different. It was quiet, calm, and utterly devoid of my old aggression. The sound of it didn't startle me. In fact, it felt safe. It was a voice that didn't invite conflict. It was a voice that simply served. The final frontier was my face. I had always seen it as a functional thing. Strong jaw, straight nose, a few scars from my rugby days. It was a man's face. Vivian saw it as a canvas. One evening, she had me sit on a stool in front of her vanity mirror. She laid out an array of brushes, pots, and pencils. "A good maid is always presentable," she said. "Her appearance should be pleasing and immaculate." My first instinct was to bolt. This was too far. Makeup was a line I hadn't even considered. But her touch was so clinical, so professional, that it disarmed me. She started with a light foundation, just to even out my skin tone. The brush was soft, tickling my cheeks. Then, a touch of blush. "It just brings a bit of life to your face," she murmured, more to herself than to me. The final touch was lipstick. She chose a subtle, neutral shade, just a hint darker than my natural lip color. As she brought the tube towards my mouth, my breath caught in my throat. The sensation of the waxy, smooth color gliding across my lips was electric. It was a definitive, irreversible act. It felt hot, like a brand. When she was done, she stepped back. "Look," she whispered. I forced my eyes to meet my reflection, and I was stunned. It was still my face, my bone structure, my eyes, but it was different, softer. The harsh angles were smoothed out. The blush gave my cheeks a warmth I didn't know they could have. The lipstick defined my mouth, making it look less like a firm, determined line and more like something expressive. The man I was used to seeing, the hard-nosed athlete and businessman, was gone. In his place was a stranger, a calm, gentle-looking person with my eyes. I started to say, and then stopped. My new, softer voice sounded right coming from this new face. A quiet, unbidden thought whispered through my mind. I don't look bad. A hot flush of shame immediately followed. I was a man. I wasn't supposed to find pleasure in looking pretty. I wasn't supposed to like this. But the thought was there. Undeniable. I had looked in the mirror, and for a fleeting second, I had liked the gentle, polished stranger looking back at me. And that realization was more frightening than the heels, the dress, or the word mistress had ever been. I had assumed that my life with Vivian, this strange, hidden world of aprons and obedience, was a unique and isolated phenomenon. I thought I was the only man in the world on this bizarre journey. It was a lonely feeling, a secret that both thrilled me and filled me with a sense of profound alienation. Then, one Saturday, Vivian told me we were going on an outing. "You will wear a simple black skirt, a white blouse, and your low heels," she instructed. "Your makeup will be minimal. You are to be my personal assistant for the day." The idea of going outside, dressed like this, sent a jolt of pure panic through me. Inside the apartment, it was a contained world, a game. Outside, there was scrutiny, judgment, danger. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "To a place where you can learn from others," was all she would say. The drive was agonizing. I sat in the passenger seat, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, my back ramrod straight. The skirt felt impossibly strange against the car seat. I felt like every driver in every other car was staring at me, even though my attire was, for the most part, androgynous and conservative. But I knew I had shaved legs and a touch of lipstick on. I felt like I was wearing a neon sign. We pulled up to a large, elegant stone building in a quiet, leafy suburb. It looked like an old country club or a private school. A discreet brass plaque by the door read Roseville Academy. Nothing more. Vivian led me inside. The interior was hushed and impeccably decorated. The air smelled of beeswax and fresh flowers. A woman with silver hair and a serene smile greeted us at a reception desk. "Welcome, Mistress Moore. Your student is expected." Student. She led us down a long, carpeted hallway and opened a door to a large, sunlit room. And what I saw inside made my world tilt on its axis once again. There were about a dozen other people in the room, all dressed in various forms of maid or servant attire, and they were all men. They ranged in age from their early 20s to their late 50s. Some were tall and broad-shouldered like me, their masculine frames softened by the cut of a blouse or the drape of a skirt. Others were slender and naturally more androgynous, but they were all, unmistakably, men. 1. A man with the chiseled jaw and piercing gaze of a corporate CEO was meticulously arranging a tea set on a cart. Another, whose muscular arms and disciplined posture screamed military background, was practicing a deep, graceful curtsy, his movements precise and focused. I just stood in the doorway, frozen. I wasn't alone. I wasn't a freak. I was one of many. A wave of relief so powerful it almost buckled my knees washed over me. I looked at the other men, and for the first time, I felt a sense of belonging in this new identity. I wasn't Ethan Walker, the anomaly. I was just another student here. I was normal. The session was an advanced class in etiquette and service. It was led by the silver-haired woman, whose name was Miss Albright. Her authority was absolute, but gentle. We spent an hour on the art of serving tea. It was a ballet of precision. How to hold the pot to avoid drips, the exact angle at which to pour, how to present the cup and saucer to the master or mistress, all while maintaining a posture of quiet deference. My eyes were to be kept lowered, my movements economical and silent. We practiced kui chao, or bowing. It wasn't just bending at the waist, it was an expression of respect. The depth and duration of the bow dependent on the situation. Ms. Albright corrected my form, her touch light on my back. Lower from the hips. Elise, keep your spine straight. It is a gesture of dignity, not groveling. She had called me Elise. Vivienne had registered me with a new name, a name I hadn't been consulted on. A woman's name. A few weeks ago, that would have sent me into a spiral of rage. Now, hearing it in this context, surrounded by my peers, it felt right. It felt like a name for the person I was in this room, the person who was learning to serve, the person who wasn't carrying the weight of being Ethan. During a short break, we were allowed to speak quietly amongst ourselves. The man with the military bearing, a former Marine named Frank, came over to me. His maid name, he told me, was Florence. He nodded towards me, a small, appraising look in his eyes. First time. I nodded, feeling shy. Is it that obvious? He chuckled, a surprisingly soft sound. We all have that deer-in-the-headlights look at first. You know, he said, lowering his voice. You look a lot more relaxed than when you first walked in. The tension is gone from your shoulders. His words hit me with the force of a revelation. He was right. The knot of anxiety that usually lived between my shoulder blades had vanished. I wasn't performing. I wasn't pretending. I was just learning. I was part of a community with its own rules, its own skills, its own sense of purpose. I spent 20 years giving orders. Frank, or Florence, continued, his gaze distant. Always had to be the tough guy, the leader. You carry that around. You know it gets heavy. Here, I just get to be Florence. I just get to make sure the tea is hot and the silver is polished. It's a different kind of purpose. It's quiet. I understood completely. Looking around the room at the former CEO, the soldier, the others, I saw the same story in their focused expressions. We were all refugees from the relentless war of masculinity. We had all, in our own ways, grown tired of the armor. Here, at Roosevelt, we were learning how to finally take it off. And I realized, with a startling clarity, that I couldn't remember the last time I had to prove I was a man. The question had simply ceased to be relevant. For months, my life existed in two separate, hermetically sealed compartments. There was my day life as Ethan Walker, the competent, no-nonsense logistics manager, and there was my evening and weekend life as Elise, the devoted maid to Mistress Vivienne, and a quiet student at Roseville Academy. I became an expert at code switching, at changing my posture, my voice, and my entire mindset in the car ride between my office and Vivienne's apartment. I thought I could maintain this separation forever. I was naive. The world doesn't allow for such neat divisions. Eventually, the walls come down. It happened on a Tuesday. My older brother, Mark, had been calling me for weeks. He was a contractor, a man's man in the most traditional sense, loud, opinionated, and a firm believer in the natural order of things. I'd been putting him off with excuses about being busy at work. Finally, he got tired of waiting. He showed up at Vivienne's apartment unannounced, a six-pack of beer in his hand, ready to drag my ass out for a guys' night. Vivienne had been drilling me on maintaining my composure. That evening, I was in full uniform, dusting the bookshelves in the living room. When the doorbell rang, my heart leaped into my throat. Vivienne answered it. I heard Mark's booming voice, and I froze, my feather duster hovering in midair. "Hey, Viv, is my little brother home?" The hermit finally decided to emerge. I heard Vivienne's calm reply. "He's here, Mark. Why don't you come in?" There was no escape. Mark strode into the living room, a grin on his face that vanished the instant he saw me. He stopped dead. His eyes went wide. Scanning me from the top of my neatly pinned hair, Vivienne had insisted I grow it out a bit down to the sensible black heels on my feet. He took in the black dress, the starched white apron, the feather duster in my hand. His brain tried to process the information, failed, and then rebooted in a state of pure, uncomprehending shock. Ethan! What? What the hell is this? Is this a joke? Some kind of costume party? I felt the blood drain from my face. The old Ethan would have panicked, would have gotten angry, would have made up a clumsy lie. He would have been crippled by shame. But the person standing there was Elise. Ms. Albright's training, Vivian's coaching, it all kicked in. I straightened my back. I kept my hands calm. I looked him in the eye, my gaze steady, not defiant. I used the soft, measured voice I had been practicing. Hello, Mark. It's not a costume party. This is my life now. He stared at me, his mouth hanging open. Then the shock curdled into disgust. Your life? What are you talking about? You're dressed like a French maid. What's she done to you? He glared at Vivian, who was standing calmly by the doorway. Vivian has done nothing but help me, I said, my voice remaining even. She helped me find a part of myself I didn't know existed. The confrontation with my parents a week later was even worse. Mark had, of course, called them immediately. They demanded a meeting. We met at their house, the house I grew up in. I didn't wear the uniform, but I couldn't pretend to be the old Ethan anymore. I wore simple slacks and a soft sweater. I didn't slouch. My posture was straight, my movements deliberate. I spoke in my new, softer. My father, a man who believed a firm handshake could solve most of the world's problems, just kept shaking his head, unable to look at me. My mother cried. We don't understand. Ethan, she wept. Did something happen to you? Are you sick? I thought I would crumble under the weight of their disappointment and confusion. I thought the shame I had worked so hard to overcome would come rushing back and drown me. But as I sat there, listening to their fears, a strange sense of calm settled over me. I wasn't the person they thought I was, and that was okay. Their image of me was based on the armor, not the man inside it. I took a deep breath. Mom, Dad, I said, my voice gentle but clear. I'm not sick. I've never been healthier. I've spent my entire life trying to be the man I thought I was supposed to be, tough, in control, never showing weakness. It was exhausting. I was living a role, and I wasn't happy. I gestured vaguely. This life with Viviane, it allows me to be something else. It allows me to be peaceful. For the first time, I'm not fighting anymore. I've never felt so truly myself. They didn't understand. Not really. But they saw that I wasn't broken. I wasn't crazy. I was calm and articulate. I was, in my own strange way, happy. The most surprising reaction came from my best friend, Dave. I had played football with him since we were 10. We were co-captains in high school. He was the one person whose judgment I feared the most. I met him for coffee, determined to tell him before he heard it from Mark. I explained everything, my voice low, expecting him to laugh or get angry. He just listened, stirring his coffee, his eyes fixed on the cup. When I was finished, there was a long silence. So you're like her butler? He finally asked. Her maid, I corrected softly, among other things. He shook his head, a wry, sad smile on his face. Man, that is out there. He looked up at me, and I saw something in his eyes I didn't expect. Not judgment, but a deep, weary exhaustion that mirrored my own from before. You know, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Sometimes, I get so tired. So goddamn tired of it all. The mortgage, the kids, my boss, breathing down my neck. My wife wanting me to be her rock all the time, just once. I'd love for someone else to be in charge, to just tell me what to do. And I'll do it. No decisions, no pressure. He looked at me, a flicker of understanding in his gaze. I guess. I kind of get it. I wish I could just let go like that too. In that moment, I understood. My old life, the one that looked so perfect and powerful from the outside, was a prison for so many men. My journey wasn't about losing my position in the world. It was about choosing a different one. It wasn't a fall from grace. It was a step into a different kind of freedom. The nature of my intimacy with Vivian underwent a profound transformation. The relationship I'd had before, the one I had with all women, was predicated on a kind of gentle conquest. I was the initiator, the pursuer, the one who took. It was about possession, about claiming. My affection was a form of branding, a way of saying, "This is mine." That was gone. It had been replaced by something quieter, deeper, and infinitely more complex. Our new intimacy wasn't about grand gestures or passionate, possessive encounters. It was woven into the fabric of our daily lives, found in the smallest moments of service and acknowledgement. It was in the way she would adjust the bow on my apron. I would be standing before her, ready to receive my instructions for the day. And she would reach out, her fingers deftly retying the satin ribbon at the small of my back. Her touch wasn't overtly sensual, but it was incredibly intimate. It was a touch of ownership. Yes, but also of care. It was the touch of an artist perfecting her work. A gesture that said, "You are mine, and you will be perfect." And in that touch, I felt a sense of purpose and belonging that was more potent than any kiss from my old life. It was in the language of our eyes. When I knelt to serve her tea, my training dictated that I keep my gaze lowered, but sometimes, as I offered the cup, she would murmur my name. "Elise?" It was a command to look up. I would raise my eyes to meet hers, and in that shared glance, a whole conversation would take place. I would see her approval, her pleasure, her affection, and she would see my devotion, my willingness, my contentment. It was a connection that transcended words, a silent acknowledgement of the bond we shared. In her eyes, I wasn't just a servant. I was her servant, and it was in that specificity that I found my value. Our most intimate moments were often spoken in whispers, after a long day. She might be reading on the sofa while I sat on a cushion at her feet. Content just to be in her presence, she would reach down and run her fingers through my hair, which was now long enough to feel soft. "You please me, Elise," she would whisper. Those 3 words held more power than any declaration of love I had ever heard. "I love you" felt like a negotiation, a statement that often carried with it unspoken expectations. But "you please me" was a pure, unadulterated statement of fact. It was the ultimate validation of my existence in her world. My purpose was to serve her, to please her, and her words were confirmation that I was succeeding. It filled me with a warmth, a deep and abiding joy that settled in my bones. It was the feeling of a job well done, of a purpose fulfilled. I no longer loved Vivian as a man seeking to possess a woman. That felt like a crude, primitive emotion now. My love was something different. It was the love of a devotee for their deity, the love of a knight for their queen. It was a love rooted in an act of will, a conscious choice to surrender, to dedicate my efforts to her happiness. My reward was not in taking from her, but in the simple, profound satisfaction of her acceptance of my offering. We still had a physical relationship, of course, but even that had changed. It was no longer a clash of wills or a dance of dominance and submission. It was an extension of my service. My body was another instrument with which to bring her pleasure. My own satisfaction was secondary, derived almost entirely from hers. The release I felt was not just physical, it was the release of my own ego, the joy of being used for a purpose I believed in. One evening, I was polishing her shoes, carefully working the wax into the leather until it shone. She was watching me, a thoughtful expression on her face. "Do you ever miss it, Ethan?" she asked quietly. "Being in charge?" I paused my work, considering the question. I thought of my old life, of the constant pressure, the battles, the hollow victories. I looked at the shoe in my hand. at the deep, satisfying gloss I had managed to create. I looked up at her. "My mistress." "No," I replied, my voice soft but certain. "This maid has never felt more needed. This maid has never felt more loved." And I knew, with every fiber of my being, that it was the truth. This was not a relationship of possession. It was a relationship of mutual recognition, of a perfectly balanced dynamic where my surrender was met with her care, and my service was met with her pleasure. It was a form of intimacy I never could have imagined. And it was everything I had ever truly wanted, without ever knowing it. There came a point where the line between Ethan and Elise began to blur. Not in a confusing way, but in an integrated one. It was no longer a costume I put on, or a role I played. The meekness, the gentleness, the desire to serve, these were not traits I was performing. They were aspects of myself that had been dormant, and were now fully awake. I stopped thinking of my service as a sacrifice. That word implies giving something up. But I hadn't given anything up. I had simply exchanged one set of priorities for another. I had traded the heavy burden of constant control for the light, focused purpose of devotion. It wasn't a loss. It was a liberation. My masculinity hadn't vanished, as I had once feared it would. It hadn't been erased or destroyed. Instead, it felt like it had been refined, melted down and recast into something new. The aggression, the need for dominance, the performative toughness, those brittle parts had been burned away. What remained was a different kind of strength, the strength to be vulnerable, the strength to be gentle, the strength to find fulfillment in service rather than in command. It was a quieter, more resilient form of manhood, one that didn't need to announce itself with a roar. The name Elise became more and more important to me. At first, it had been a name Vivian had given me, another tool in my training, but now, it was a name I claimed for myself. At the academy, I introduced myself as Elise without hesitation. It felt more honest, more accurate than introducing myself as Ethan. It wasn't because I hated Ethan. I didn't. I looked back on my old self not with contempt, but with a kind of gentle pity. He had been trying so hard, fighting so desperately to live up to an impossible ideal. He had been so lonely in his fortress of control. Elise was not a rejection of Ethan. She was his evolution. She was the part of me that Ethan had been forced to bury deep inside, the part that yearned for peace, for purpose, for a chance to lay down the sword and shield, and simply be. One afternoon, Vivian and I were walking through a park. I was not in uniform, just wearing a pair of soft linen trousers and a simple shirt. It was one of those rare moments where we were not mistress and maid, but simply two people enjoying the sun. She turned to me, her expression serious. "You know, if you ever wanted to stop this, we could," she said. "If you ever wanted to be Ethan again, full time, I would understand." I stopped walking and took her hand. I looked at our intertwined fingers, then into her eyes. The thought of going back, of picking up that heavy armor again, felt like a death sentence. "Vivian," I said, my voice full of a calm certainty that the old Ethan never possessed. Ethan was the role. He was the costume I wore for 29 years. Elise. Elise is who I am when I'm not pretending anymore. I had come to understand that identity isn't a fixed point, a concrete prison you're born into. It's a river. It flows. It changes course. It adapts. My gender was still male, but my expression of it, my soul's true nature, had found its home in a place I never could have anticipated. I was no longer a man defined by what I could conquer, but by what I could willingly offer. I was Elise. And for the first time in my life, I felt completely and utterly whole. The night is quiet. A soft rain patters against the window panes. A gentle, rhythmic sound that insulates us from the outside world. Here, inside, everything is calm. Everything is in its proper place. The lamps are low, casting a warm, golden glow across the room. Vivienne is sitting in her favorite armchair, the one with the high back and velvet upholstery. She is wearing a silk robe, a book resting in her lap. Though she is not reading, Her attention is on me. I am kneeling before her on the plush rug. My maid's uniform is immaculate. The black fabric pressed, the white apron, a startling, crisp contrast. My back is straight, a posture now as natural to me as breathing. My hands are folded neatly in my lap. I am not waiting in a state of anxious tension, but in a state of peaceful readiness. This is my position. This is my place. It feels as comfortable and right as my own skin. The silence stretches on, but it is not empty. It is filled with a deep, unspoken understanding. It is the silence of two people who fit together perfectly. A lock and its key. After a long moment, she reaches out. Her fingers are cool and gentle as they touch my chin, tilting my face upwards to meet her gaze. Her eyes are soft, filled with a profound affection that warms me from the inside out. There is no game here, no pretense. This is the truth of us. "Are you happy?" "Elise," she asks, her voice a soft murmur that is almost part of the rain's gentle song. I look into her eyes. The eyes of the woman who saw me, who truly saw past the armor and found the person cowering inside. She didn't break me. She freed me. She didn't diminish me. She gave me a purpose that finally fit. A genuine smile spreads across my face. There is no fear left in it. No shame, no conflict. It is a smile of pure, unadulterated contentment. The journey was terrifying, the path confusing, but the destination is peace. "Yes, mistress," I say, and my voice is steady and clear, filled with the quiet joy of a man who has finally come home. "This is where I belong."